Wow, really happy to be here. My name's Sabrina Ourania. I'm an astrologer, amongst other things. My company's called Goddess Alchemy, and I work with astrology and I work with alchemy to really help people understand how we could utilize our connection to the cosmos to gain a greater level of self-mastery and self-discovery. And I want to talk a little bit about astrology in general, but I really would like to share how, in this moment in time, and specifically for this tribe, for us, for those of us who are entrepreneurs, who are really trying to create a path that has never been done before, that really is uniquely our own, to share our gifts. And for those of us who travel or digital nomads, how we can utilize astrology, I like to call it astro hacking, to really optimize our gifts and our sharings in the world, how we can really co-create with time. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself first. I've been a practicing astrologer for about 10 years now. I grew up in the DC metropolitan area, so deep in Babylon, a very different environment than here, and there's not a whole lot of astrology happening in that space. And people always ask me, how do you become an astrologer? And I frankly always had an interest in it. My background, my ancestry is Greek, and my name, Urania, it's my middle name, was gifted to me by my grandmother. It's her name. We passed it along in the family. And in mythology, Urania was the ancient Greek muse of astrology and astronomy, which at one point in time was the same art form, actually. And many people don't know this, but some of our most famous astronomers of both the ancient and Middle Ages sort of time period were actually all practicing astrologers. So people like Kepler and Galileo, we know a lot of what they've offered in science. But at the time, there were not universities offering grants for them to make these epic discoveries about the universe and what they were finding. So they were actually making money in their day job by being astrologers for wealthy patrons who wanted to know, is this going to be a good year for me financially? Do I want to go to war? All of this kinds of stuff. So for the longest time, the practice of astrology and astronomy were the same art. And over time, that kind of segued. But in terms of my experience with astrology and getting into it, I always had a fascination. I always had an interest. Like I said, I felt like it was kind of part of my destiny to do this work. And luckily, I had a very open-minded family that let me spend a lot of time hanging out in metaphysical bookstores and studying. Now, in the past, to be an astrologer, you really needed apprenticeship with somebody, or you were coming across astrological texts here and there and digging in what you could find. But we live in a time right now where you have access to so much information. There are so many videos online. You could become an astrologer if you really dug into it so quickly because there's so much access to information now. But typically that was the route. People would have an apprenticeship with someone. So for me, it began with digging into books and really reading a lot. And then ultimately, I discovered a book called Cosmos and Psyche by a man named Richard Tarnas. And if you're really into very dense and heady books, I highly recommend this one. It really changed my life. And it really opened my mind to how we understand history actually utilizing astrological time cycles. What is the emerging in consciousness? And how can we understand that through the movements of the very slow planets? We're talking about Neptune, we're talking about Uranus, we're talking about Pluto, and how they affect us and our consciousness and our emerging development over time. And so I was really inspired by this book. I just finished my undergrad in philosophy, and I ended up going and getting a master's degree in philosophy to study with this particular professor, Rick Tarnas. And I also decided I really wanted to patch in some of the holes in my astrological development and knowledge, and so there are international and online schools, if it's something that you are interested in, accredited online institutions for astrology. So I went on and did a 2-year online program. But the cool thing about astrology is it's always changing, so there's always more to learn. And this is a discipline that's been around for thousands of years, and many different cultures have added their 2 cents into it. And so it's a study that once you get into, you could learn forever. You'll never get to the bottom of it. It's just the rabbit hole that goes on. And that's probably one thing that's so exciting about it for me is, I continue to develop deeper and deeper levels of mastery and knowledge in it. And there's so much more to learn. So how many people here believe in astrology? By a show of hands. Yeah. Okay, awesome. It's not everybody's cup of tea, totally. I'm hoping that in this talk you might allow yourself to kind of suspend your disbelief for a moment and see if anything that I have to share resonates with you at all. I think that typically what we encounter with astrology is very pop culture kind of context of astrology, right? We open a magazine or newspaper, there's like a 3-sentence little blurb about our sun sign, and it's supposed to mean something relevant to us. And, that form of astrology has really only come about in the last 100 years as a way to kind of get it out there to the masses. But for the longest time, the practice of astrology was a very detailed and complicated science and art form. If you wanted to practice astrology back in the day, you needed to be a mathematician and you needed to know science because you're tracking the movements of the planets. You're going to need to know how to figure that out through complex calculations, and you need to understand science to do it before you even get to the cool, fun stuff, which is like, what does that mean for you? Like, how do you get to interpret this? And that's the art piece. But these days, luckily, we have really incredible software. We can have apps on our phones. That's something I use a lot. You can go online, plug in your birthday info, get your chart. It takes a little time to kind of figure out how to read it, But in the old days, you were not an astrologer unless you were, you really had the academics and you could really understand the math and science of it. So we have got pop culture astrology, but I highly recommend, giving yourself an opportunity at some point to either pull up your own chart or get a reading with a professional astrologer before you completely write off astrology, because it's a lot deeper and more intricate than that. And there's so many incredible applications. And that's what I want to talk about today. We typically understand astrology for self-development, personal discovery, right? So I've got a chart, I've got a blueprint. It's like my cosmic signature. This is what I was born into this world with. It's sort of like the universal macrocosmic view of what is emerging in the moment when I come into being. So I like to think that the universe is always asking a question, and whatever is emerging in that moment is the response or the answer to that question. So my birth was the answer to the question that the universe was asking at that time. And if we pull back and we look at our whole solar system, we're seeing the same reality and that same question being answered. And so when you actually are coming into being, you are the one bringing in that medicine that was requested at that moment. And so the snapshot of your birth chart is a way to really understand like what our ultimate potentials are that are available to us. So one of the questions people have around this is like, well, doesn't that mean, that things are fated or destiny and there's no free will? And I highly disagree with that. For me, we have inherent in our birth chart all of the potentials available to us, but to the degree that we choose to actualize, our level of consciousness, the vibration that we're resonating with is going to determine whether these are more positive or more challenging and negative manifestations. All of it's there. All of it's available to us, but we have work to do in our own self-development if we really want to actualize it at the highest potential. So there's choice there. It's not like we're fated, we're condemned to our chart in some way. This is limiting me somehow. We all know we're limitless beings here. So I feel like that's just an important thing to share, because I don't think that it requires that we have this fatalistic view that things are already predetermined and set. Because, in creator consciousness, we're all co-participating in this. And so we get to actualize our potentials or not, depending on the work that we choose to do. So one of the main ways that people utilize astrology is, like I said, is for self-development and self-discovery. So that's like, you read your birth chart or you go to an astrologer and they kind of help you understand a little bit about your potentials, what your gifts are, what your challenges are, what it is that you really have to offer. Yesterday, Samantha was up here talking about how a lot of her clients are always asking, what is my purpose? What am I here to bring? I have things I want to share, but like, what am I really here to do? And I think astrology is really helpful as a tool for understanding what your gifts are. And in a way, we all really do know, but sometimes it's helpful to have somebody else, give you permission for that. Like having another person and maybe somebody who doesn't know you. That's an exciting thing about being an astrologer is I spend some time looking at your chart. I may never have met you. And then we get on a video chat together and you like get to be super blown away because I know a lot about you. And it's like, how is that possible? So there is a beautiful way that you can really see what somebody's ultimate kind of core purpose is and the gifts that they're here to share through their chart, and help honor that and give them permission to fully step into that when you see them through that lens. So that's probably how astrology is most commonly used. People come, they want to do a reading about their chart so they can better understand themselves. Another type of astrology that I really enjoy that I'll share about quickly before I really get into the astro hacking piece is relational astrology. We have our own birth chart. Somebody else does too. We find ourselves getting into relationship with them. It's a really great way to kind of deepen our understanding of a container of a relationship. People tend to want to come to me with like, oh, I met somebody. Will you look at their chart? Like, do you think we're a good match? Are we meant to be together or not? It doesn't really work that way. I mean, if you guys are vibrationally aligned and a relationship is beginning to happen, there's meaning in that. That's meant to be happening. So it's not like, oh, this is the right person or this is the wrong person. It's more about what are the fundamental dynamics that are at work in a relationship and how can you best utilize them to understand each other, and where might there be some challenges because you have some kind of core differences. And if you really are interested in working through a relationship with somebody, like how you could really do that work to best meet them where they are or help them understand you a little bit better. And one of the ways that works is what's called synastry. So you have your chart and another person's birth chart, and we kind of superimpose them on top of each other. And we take a look at the sacred geometrical relationships between the planets. I think that's something a lot of people don't understand about astrology, is it's also all sacred geometry. So we're talking about actual aspects between planets. And when you look at a chart, you'll have all these like really epic sacred geometrical lines going on between the planets. It's all based on different sequences. We have oppositions, trines. These are going to be different mathematical breakdowns of a circle. And it helps us understand how the flow of energy works between somebody's planet and another person's planet. There's really 4 kind of main components to understanding a birth chart or astrology, which is we have our planets, which are like psychological functions in our character. I like to think about it as like actual characters within us. So in my opinion, we're all like polytheistic beings. We have many gods within us, many sort of voices, and they all seek to be expressed in some way or another, right? We have our solar identity, our sense of like our will, who we are out in the world, our purpose, and then we have our inner emotional nature, our needs, what makes us feel safe, and that's our moon sign. We've got our Mercury sign. It's our intelligence style. It's how we think. It's how we communicate. So all of these different planetary players are like these divine beings within us that are each seeking expression. And sometimes they work well together, and sometimes they have more challenging aspects. And then they fall into a sign. So most of us are probably familiar with our sun sign, but the sign is kind of like the costume that this planetary character is wearing that sort of helps to give it a little bit more form to identify it. So for instance, I'm a sun in Aries, so that my solar identity, how I am out in the world, is one of a pioneer, is somebody who likes to initiate new things. I want to be starting new projects. So that the sign that it's in ultimately kind of colors the way that energy is expressed. The next big piece is what are known as the houses. Has anybody heard of houses in astrology before? Yeah, a few people. Okay, cool. So this is where the astro hacking piece comes in. I recently just taught a workshop this January about how we can utilize astrology to plan out our life and plan out our year. And as people who work for ourselves, as entrepreneurs, as people who are able to kind of create our own schedule, this is a super powerful tool to have, because you have an opportunity with astrology to cast forward into the future and kind of see what is unfolding for you throughout the year. And the houses are really helpful because what they represent are basically fields of experience or areas of life in which our planetary energies are playing themselves out. So we natally have planets in particular houses, and that's kind of areas of focus in our lives. Like, why are we really here? Are we here to focus more on relationship? Are we here to focus more on career? Are we here to do more humanitarian work? That's going to show up there. But in terms of the transits, and that's where the planets are actually moving in the sky right now, it's showing us where we have emerging properties, where we're actually developing in any given moment. So we all know that the planets are continuing to move all the time. So they're moving through the zodiac always. And based on where your natal chart is and the signatures that you have in your chart, it's going to be stimulating and activating different sensitive places in your chart. And that's going to happen in different signs, and it's going to happen in different houses. So if you can pay attention to where the activity is happening in terms of houses, it's going to say this area of life is something that we're focusing on right now. So I'll give you an example. The 10th house is the house of career. So if you're interested in launching a new business or starting a new project or maybe even changing careers, it's likely that that's already going to be coming up for you synchronistically, but it would be a great time when you have planets, particularly something like Mars maybe, or the sun, an activating planet, moving through your 10th house. That's a moment in time where the focus is already going to be on career, so it might be a really good time for you to do that work. That way we're able to kind of work with the flow of time. See, I really like to think of astrology as telling what time it is. We often think of time as quantitative. So it's 1 o'clock, it's 2 o'clock, it's the first month, it's the second month, but time has an essence of a quality to it. And astrology is a way of understanding what the quality of time is. So specifically, utilizing our understanding of transits, where the planets are right now, and how they're moving through our birth chart. and lighting up different areas can help us align with the flow of what is currently happening and where the energy is wanting to go, so we can capitalize on that. Is it time to focus on home? Are we working on renovating a house or finding a new place? Is it time to focus on career? Is it time to focus on our group and social dynamics? Knowing where the planets are falling as they travel through the zodiac in your chart is going to let you know when is the best time to do that work. And if you sit down for a little while, like beginning of the year, maybe the beginning of the month, and take a look at what those transits are going to look like for that time period, you can then plan your life in a way that easily flows with that, as opposed to resisting it or kind of trying to do it your own way. The last thing I want to talk about is something called astrocartography. Has anybody heard of that? Cool. This is exciting. I think it plays off a little bit about what Zoe was talking about earlier. Yeah. She was talking about really powerful places on the planet. You know, what we can do with astrocartography is we can take our individual birth charts and we can actually overlay that on the globe to understand where planetary lines move for us. And what that means is it ultimately shifts the tilt of our chart so that particular parts of our personality are brought to the fore more in certain areas versus others. And this is really helpful. For instance, like in my work, I lead retreats. And I want to know when a good time is to do a retreat. And there's no way I'm going to schedule an event, a workshop, or something without looking at the astrology, because I want to kind of make sure I'm capturing the energy that I'm looking for in that time. But I also want to know where I might want to do it, because picking a place that is aligned with a particular line. So for instance, a Jupiter line. Jupiter lines are going to bring expansion and abundance. They're great for teaching and learning and seeking. So if I'm trying to teach a retreat, thank you, I want to find a space where that's going to be expanded for me. And it looks like I'm running out of time. I could talk about astrology forever. If it's something that you're all interested in, please come and find me. My website is goddessalchemist.com. You can find me on Instagram as goddess_alchemist. Super interested in talking to you more about this. And I hope you all have a really wonderful festival. Love y'all so much. Yeah. Thanks.